Welcome to State of Play. I'm Will Todman, Chief of Staff of the Geopolitics and Foreign Policy Department at the Center for Strategic and International Studies. In this podcast, we bring together our leading experts to unpack the latest geopolitical developments from around the world and what it all means. President Trump has just got back from his first big trip to Asia in his second term. He described his meeting with Xi Jinping as 12 out of 10. He said they agreed on virtually everything. He said he is bringing back trillions of dollars to USA through new deals that he's signed. He attended a peace treaty signing between Thailand and Cambodia that he's claimed credit for. Seems like it went very well. But he'd also raised expectations that he would meet with Kim Jong-un. That didn't happen. He made the surprise announcement that the US will start testing nuclear weapons again, which I think has sent shockwaves through parts of the world. And there are questions already swirling about what the Xi meeting actually achieved, particularly given some of the different readouts that we've had from the Chinese. So, was Trump's Asia trip a success? Or did it fail to meet the expectations, either that President Trump himself set or that others had for the trip? So I am joined today by Victor Cha and Brian Hart. As I hope our listeners know at this stage, Victor Cha is the president of the Geopolitics and Foreign Policy Department and our career chair. Victor, it's getting really boring that every time you're on, I say you've just got back from Asia, but you have just got back from Asia.
Yes, that's right. Yeah, we had a big CSIS conference in Japan. We have one every year. And I was out there along with Dr. Hamry and some other folks from CSIS, Christy Gavella, our Japan chair.
Okay, great. And of course, Japan was a big part of this trip. And then Brian Hart is Deputy Director and Fellow in the China Power Project. Welcome, Brian. This is your first time on State of Play.
Oh, is
yeah,
that
it's
right?
great to be here.
First time?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
Now, Brian, sadly, I know that you have a knee injury, but you are in good company. And we were talking about this earlier. Back in 2019, there was a lot of speculation about Xi's health based on him limping in some of the videos. So given your newfound and personal expertise on this topic, how is he looking? Is he doing all right?
Yeah. Well, yeah. So I've been hobbling around CSIS today with a case of runner's knee. It made me think as this summit was happening back to 2019 when she had a slight limp and everyone, immediately went to conversations about succession change and who's going to succeed Xi. Didn't see him limping or any signs of ailments at this summit so far. So I guess that's good to see that he's
good for him.
Good
Yes.
health.
Yeah. And before we dive in, I want to address something that happened on the last episode of State of Play, which is I was trying to protect my colleagues by not passing on my cold, and Catherine Zuki very kindly guest hosted. Unfortunately, one of our guests, Greg Poling, threatened a coup and made sports references that I didn't understand. I think he knew that. I just want to be clear, we do not tolerate power grabs on State of Play anywhere in the world or on this podcast. So, Greg, watch out. But let's actually talk about this trip. And I really want to start by rewinding a bit to last week, before the trip happened, and reminding our listeners of what expectations were for the trip. So what did we think the focus of the trip would be? What did you expect President Trump to achieve? Victor, what were you looking out for?
Sure. I'm happy to opine on that. Let me say it's great that Brian's on. First time on the show. Brian did one of our most impactful pieces at CSIS over the past year, the report on shipbuilding, which got a lot of interest.
Which I look forward to bringing up today.
Yeah.
Oh, great. Good. We'll link to it as well. Yeah.
Which was, got a lot of attention on the Hill and the executive branch. And so we're really proud of that. So to me, I looked at this, if these were the Trump people planning this, I looked at this as a 3-act play, right? And the first act was Trump as the peacemaker. And so that was going to Malaysia, on the sidelines of ASEAN and the East Asia Summit. The other thing is, the U.S. used to get the bad rap because we would never show up at these meetings, right? And that was half the battle was to show up. We commit to it, and then the last minute, the Secretary of State would go or something. So Trump deserves credit for showing up at these meetings. But the other thing that he does is he bends the schedule around him, right? So like he'll go to the location, do these meetings, and then he'll leave like a day early. And that's what he did That's what he did at East Asia Summit, APEC. Anyway, the first act was Trump as the peacemaker. So he goes to Malaysia, oversees Cambodia, Thailand. They call it a peace deal, but it's basically a ceasefire. And of course, he wasn't the only one involved. Anwar Ibrahim was quite involved. Even the Chinese were involved. And like the U.S. basically contributed by threatening not to reduce reciprocal tariffs on either country if they don't stop fighting. So, and then the second act of the play was Trump the Rainmaker, which is, in Korea and Japan, Japan's commitment to $550 billion of investment, Korea's commitment to $350 billion of investment, so nearly $1 trillion of investment. And in fact, like what you read, that's what he said, right, in his Truth Social post coming back. And then the last act of the play was Trump the Dealmaker, right? And that was the big meeting with Xi Jinping. It got played up incredibly, like this was the big meeting. And it was almost like this was the crescendo of the trip. And then the other part of the deal-making piece didn't happen, which was a meeting with the North Korean leader. So overall, I think it was like, if you look at it that way, it was a successful trip for him.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Brian, what were you watching out for beforehand?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think having expectations these days seems like a luxury we can't afford, just given how chaotic everything can be. But I do think I was pretty laser focused on trying to figure out what would happen with the Trump-Xi meeting and what, if any, deal would be hammered out. It wasn't clear until pretty late in the game whether they were actually going to meet and whether they were going to have this deal for sure. And so, but looking at the pieces that we had before that, I expected something like, rolling back a lot of the moves that have been put in place since President Trump came into the White House in January, a lot of these tariffs, some of the investigations and things like shipbuilding. So rolling some of those pieces back. But I didn't expect some kind of grand bargain where we resolve a lot of the big U.S. China fundamental issues. And I think that that's essentially what we got. There's some progress here. I think maybe we can talk more about this. I think fentanyl is the big question for me about where we go from here.
Yeah, I would love to dive deeper into this. So this meeting happened this morning. We're recording on Thursday the 30th, although that was several hours ago now, and it already feels somehow like a lifetime ago. But how would you characterize the success of this meeting? Did it live up to expectations? Yeah,
I mean, again, like you said, Trump described it as a 12 out of 10. I think he tried to put a positive spin on it. I think the sense that I got is things were a little bit more tense than that, a little bit maybe more terse. I think they said the meeting was about 100 minutes. So that's pretty short by historical standards in terms of, U.S. China presidential meetings. So I think they got in there, they discussed some of these specific details and then kind of wrapped it up. They specifically said, President Trump said they didn't talk about Taiwan. So I think they were there to talk about some of these very specific things and move on.
And in your view, that's a good thing, right? Because you wrote about this beforehand. I read your piece on what Taiwan how it might crop up.
Yeah, well, I mean, one of the big concerns that I had, and I think how others have had, is that Trump wanting to be this deal maker could roll in concessions on Taiwan, language changes to U.S. policy on Taiwan about opposing Taiwan independence was the big question as to whether, that's something that China has long wanted the U.S. to say, and so there's reporting that even some of President Trump's advisors were worried that he may do this in an effort to kind of extract some kind of economic and trade deal. So from my perspective, it's good that Taiwan didn't come up in this specific context. Yeah. Obviously, the U.S. and China need to continue to talk about Taiwan for peace and stability in the Taiwan Strait. But in this context, I'm glad that didn't get roped into all of this.
Right. Victor, any takeaways from you from the Trump-Xi meeting?
I mean, I agree with that. I did a couple of hits in New York while I was in New York yesterday about this, and everybody talked about, are they going to make the big grand deal? And I didn't ever expect that they would make a big grand deal. That it would basically be, as it was about fentanyl, rare earths, and soybeans on the U.S. side, and then tariff reductions, maybe something on investment controls and chips, but that this would be really an interim agreement that, unfortunately, I think may last for a little bit. It sort of de-escalates things for the time being. But I think the relationship, unfortunately, has been pretty much set, which is these are the tools they're going to use against each other, right? It's very clear that these are the tools they're going to use against each other, and they're de-escalating for now, but it's going to ratchet up again, right? And it may ratchet up in advance of Trump's trip to China sometime in early 2026. So I think, for now, maybe markets benefit from this a little bit. People will always figure out how to make money off of volatility. But I described it as sort of these are two boxers who are now, they're in between rounds right now, right? Mm-hmm. And that they'll come out, and unfortunately, we'll see an overall escalation. Like somebody asked me the other day, Brian, like if to what extent, like, so where we are right now after the Xi-Trump summit, are we better off than where we were at the end of Trump 1?
Yeah.
Right. And like, I don't think I can say yes to that, right? Average tariff rates are higher now, right, than they were at the end of Trump 1. So we're kind of on this escalatory step ladder, taking 2 steps up, 1 step down, but we keep going up.
I think on that, like the biggest thing that kind of the long-term takeaway here is that, for me is watching China there's been a sea change in what China's been willing to do to escalate. During Trump 1, they were much more, I think there was more of a tit for tat, but I think Xi was willing to escalate here with things like the export controls on rare earths. I mean, that was a big escalation. If you look back about 15 years ago, the Chinese were much more reserved and weren't even forthright that they were actually, curbing back rare earth exports to Japan and things like that. They did it much more subtly. Now they're doing full on, what they call long arm jurisdiction with these extraterritoriality rules on export control. So there's been a sea change from the Chinese side, and that's one of the big takeaways here for me.
So you're seeing a more confident China? Do you feel, you track Chinese media and the statements coming out from Chinese officials. Does it feel to you like Chinese officials think they have the upper hand here, or at least a very strong hand to play?
I think so. And I've been hearing that from, Chinese scholars that I talk to. They said, for example, that Xi Jinping was very happy with the military parade that they had earlier last month, where Xi Jinping was able to look like a leader for the world and especially the global South. I think Xi Jinping views China's long-term trajectory as being, better than the U.S. overall. And I think they keep saying time is on their side. They can wait out Trump and the United States, and in the long term, they'll win. And I also think that they believe that they can bear that economic pain, even if the economic pain is worse for them. I think they think that their political system can bear it more easily than the U.S. system can, and I think that they think that gives them this upper hand and some strategic patience on these deals.
So I think like one of the things, I agree with that assessment, and one of the things for the U.S. side is if we're going to continue to play the game this way, we need to have more leverage. Like we need to find more leverage. Simply continuing to say 125%, 145%, 200% tariffs, like that's not going to do it. And so, not to toot our own horn, but we made a proposal in the Washington Post on Monday of the trip where we said there is leverage that the U.S. can use, which has a lot to do with trade dependencies that China has with the United States, with Japan, with Korea, with Australia, with the EU, many countries that it has coerced in the past. That China has very high trade dependencies on these countries in certain items, and not a small number, 600 items worth over $60 billion. And what we've called for is a collective economic deterrence arrangement, an Article 5, if you will, of countries, and that basically Trump, instead of going around Asia and Europe and tariffing our allies, should be going around Asia and Europe and saying, let's pull together a coalition. Because otherwise they're going to continue to leverage rare earths on us for the rest of our lives and longer. Yeah. And in fact, we actually found one rare earth item that China does not have control over, and that the U.S. and Western countries do have leverage on, and that's nickel oxide, and other nickel byproducts, where China it has only 4% of the world's supply of that. That's one of, I don't know how many, Brian, like many other rare earths, but But still, I mean, the point is that rather than going around tariffing our allies, we should be like organizing them in some sort of collective economic deterrence effort.
And some of the stops that President Trump made in Asia were with key US allies in the region, with Japan, with South Korea, and there were huge economic deals announced. Did those deals to you feel more like this commercial diplomacy sort of strategy that and the focus on these, eye-watering sums of money in quite a transactional way, or do you see any signs that the Trump administration is starting to play more of a role in bringing together U.S. allies in a kind of collective along the lines of what you're talking about?
Well, I don't think they're doing the latter.
Okay.
I mean, they prefer to deal with each ally individually because they can exercise the most leverage individually rather than dealing with them as a group. And in both the case of Korea and Japan, these are trade and investment framework agreements that were announced earlier in the year that basically was the price for a meeting with Trump. And then the details had to be worked out. And they were worked out in the Japan case. Every element of it pretty much has been worked out, including a list of investments that the two would engage in with the $550 billion. In the Korea case, on this entire trip, probably the one where the most actual negotiation was being done was in the Korea case, because they had not worked out the details of the trade and investment framework agreement at all. And so this was something in the end where Bessent and his counterparts in Korea had to work something out, and they basically had to get approval from Trump from it in Korea, like at the meeting, and apparently he agreed to it. So there is now some of the details of this have been worked out. But again, going back to your original question, look at a case like Japan. It's reciprocal tariffs. They've gone down from whatever 25-30% down to 15%. That's great, but at the same time, like, Japan is one of the largest exporters of silver powder to China, which is a key ingredient for adhesive elements of solar panels, right? Oh. So if China's going to go around coercing everybody on rare earths, and the number 2 and number 3 suppliers of this to China are like the United States and South Korea. They make up almost like 97% of China's import of silver powder, and they don't have much domestic consumption of it. I mean, production of it. Like, if we should be pulling together coalitions. I mean, so he's tariffing countries, but he should also be pulling together coalitions to try to address this problem that is not going to go away while Xi Jinping is in power, right? Yeah. And in fact, China's trade weaponization has gone up under Xi Jinping. It has not gone down.
I want to ask both of you if there were any surprises from this trip. Brian, did anything stick out to you?
Yeah, I mean, the last minute, just an hour or two before he went in to meet with Xi Jinping, I think he posted on Truth Social about the United States resuming nuclear weapons testing. And I think he put it in the context of China's nuclear buildup, Russia's nuclear modernization, and I think the words that he used that the U.S. would do nuclear testing on a quote an equal basis. It's not really clear exactly what that means, whether he's talking about testing nuclear capable systems like missiles and things like that, or if he's talking about actual nuclear weapons. There's a little bit of ambiguity there, but it does seem like he's actually interested potentially in resuming nuclear weapons testing.
Because the only country that's tested actual weapons is North Korea in the last few decades, right? Yeah.
It's been over 30 years since, or the last time the United States did it was 1992. And China hasn't done it since then either. And I think one of the big things to point out here on this nuclear front is that, if we do resume nuclear testing and we kind of break that norm, and that creates this competition to do this again in a new age where we have not just Russia as a competitor in the nuclear space, but also China. I think China would be the biggest beneficiary of this, because the U.S. had over 1,000 nuclear weapons tests during the Cold War before 1992. So they were able to get a lot of testing data for that to advance our nuclear weapons. China, to my knowledge, only did, I think, 45 tests in the past. So if you reset this norm that doing nuclear testing is okay, and China's the biggest beneficiary of that, they can then actually do more tests instead of just relying on modeling. So that's, to me, probably something that doesn't make sense from a policy standpoint.
Do we see any immediate reaction from China on this? Is there a sense of how?
I think, I'm interested to see. I'm sure the PLA will be scratching their heads and trying to figure out what comes next on this. I mean, I think the interesting question is, why President Trump chose to do that right then before he went to meet with President Trump. Whether it was aimed at getting leverage or whether it was aimed at, it did kind of steal some of the news media coverage from the deal itself, and I don't know if that was intentional on his part. But when I woke up to read this morning on the latest details on the Trump-Xi meeting, the first headlines I saw were about the nuclear test thing on many cases. So it kind of stole the thunder from that to some extent.
So let's then, before we begin to wrap up, let's think about the lasting impacts of this trip. Sort of what has been resolved, what's not been resolved. What should we be looking for going forward as it relates to the U.S. relationship with this whole host of countries in Asia that he has visited and just interacted with? Victor, what are you looking for going forward? I mean, does it seem like this has is this some kind of reset? It sounds like no, from what you said earlier about the boxing metaphor. It's not a reset for the US and China. But do you think allies have a better sense of what to expect from the Trump administration going forward now?
I just realized, I should have used an NFL football analogy to throw you off even more. So
he just has lost his will.
Yeah. So it's halftime.
Okay, I know that one.
You know that one? All right,
I know halftime shows.
It's halftime, and they'll come out for the third quarter at some point. Well, let me just, could I also take on the question of surprise? Because the one other surprise, I think, of this trip was, and it's related to nuclear also, was Trump agreeing to South Korea being able to enrich nuclear fuel for submarines. So nuclear fueled submarines for South Korea. This isn't getting a lot of attention, but it's a big deal, right? Because South Korea has never had nuclear powered submarines before. This is clearly in response to North Korea. South Korea does not have nuclear-tipped missiles, but they have very good ballistic missiles, and now they will have a very good sea-launched ballistic missile capability as well. And this is, a form of nuclear latency for South Korea, in which the United States has, in the past, been very clear that enrichment was not something that the South Koreans can do. So this, I think, is a big and important surprise. In terms of what to expect, I mean, so I don't think it's a big reset in the U.S. China relationship. As I said, it's halftime, and that they'll come out to compete again. Overall, I think when they set up this trip, when the administration set up this trip, they wanted to use it to really focus the president's attention on Asia. But as often is with Trump, it's not about laying out a long-term agenda. It's about what makes Trump look good. And so, like I said, peacemaker, rainmaker, and dealmaker were sort of the three things. The next thing that could possibly bring him out to the region is the Quad leaders. But given the relationship with Modi right now, and it doesn't sound like anything happened between Trump and Modi in Malaysia. I didn't see anything on that. I'm not sure if he's going to go or if they're going to do that meeting online. And then the next big thing will be when Trump goes to China, right? In early 2026. And then the last piece of this is, he didn't get to complete the one thing that he wanted to do, was another meeting with the North Korean leader. I mean, he signaled it about as much as he could on the plane, like to the press corps, everywhere. He signaled it as much as he could. And he even said he'd be willing to stay like a day longer, which you never hear him say things like that, because usually these trips, from people who've been on them with him, tell me like he gets very cranky. Like, these are long trips, they're tiring, the time difference. He doesn't get to play golf, so they make him quite wanting to come home, and that he would say he'd stay longer shows how much he wants to meet with him. So I think that's the piece that did not happen. And, Trump has said he wants to meet Kim before the end of the year.
Yep. And that, I think it reminds me of the episode that we did with you and Max, where we talked about allies and autocrats. And it seems there is this real desire to meet with some of these autocrats and to try and get deals done. But I think maybe this is the most overt sign we've seen of really saying, I really, really am open to do this. So, Brian, what are you looking for going forward?
Yeah, I mean, I think, again, I'm focused on the U.S. China element here and the longevity of whatever deal comes out. I mean, I think we're still yet to see the details on paper of what comes out. I think for me, it's just there are just so many potential road bumps that could upset this. So I'm even hesitant to call it a ceasefire. I've seen some people call it that. For me, I think it's just a tactical de-escalation for right now. I think so many things could upset this, from issues on Taiwan and the South China Sea, but also, I mean, as Victor said, I mean, I think President Trump is constantly looking for leverage in the relationship. And so I think as we're leading up to, I think they said he was going to meet with Xi in April of next year. And so I would anticipate some efforts on the U.S. side to get some leverage in between now and then, especially as we get closer to April. And so that's likely to create some flare-ups and maybe add some fragility to this. And then long term, even on the most, I think, important things that they did in this meeting was to hold off on China's export controls on most aggressive export controls on rare earths, and then the U.S. 50% rule on subsidiaries of entity list companies in China. And so they only paused those for a year. So there's a timestamp already on the most aggressive efforts here. And Trump says they're going to renew that, but that means there's a timestamp on when they have to try to redo that again.
Yeah, and it's really, if April is the date, like, you can pretty much be certain that a couple of months before then, they're both going to ratchet it up because they're looking for leverage. Yeah.
He's hoping President Trump read your Washington Post column and that saw that source of leverage. So, okay, let's move on to the quickfire round then. So first question is, if you can sum up Trump's Asia trip in one word.
Theatrical.
Okay, that fits your theater metaphor at the start with three acts.
Yeah, well, I mean,
Great.
Will, you're the you're the theater person here, so yeah.
Oh, I don't think people know about that. Anyway, Brian.
I'm gonna have to go with whirlwind because I think every article I read described this as Trump's whirlwind diplomatic tour of Asia. So I'm going with whirlwind.
Okay. So then, out of China, Russia, and the US, who's had the best week? Who's up the most? Or who's down the most?
I mean, I would say the U.S. had a good week.
Yeah.
I mean, so if we don't count Malaysia, which was sort of over the weekend, I mean, the trips to Korea and Japan went quite well. I mean, he did all the things that he wanted to do. And in Japan in particular, the Japanese, I mean, they made Trump very happy. I mean, everything down to gifting him Shinzo Abe's putter, to buying 100 Ford F-150 trucks. I mean, they really knew how to make. So I would say the U.S.
Didn't he get a crown
I was
in
gonna
Korea?
say.
I wondered if this was a bit of a joke with the no kings.
Yes, I don't know if that was intentional or not.
No, we actually have one of those crowns in CSIS.
Oh,
on the
okay.
ninth floor, we have one of those crowns.
Okay, they're
too.
just giving them out there. All right. All right, then finally, is there a word or phrase that you wish you could ban pundits from saying? Either about this Asia trip or just more broadly, something that annoys you?
Mine is, for those, this is inside baseball on think tanks, but I can't stand the phrase two finger. In every meeting and workshop we go in, people raise their hands for a two finger on a comment. And for some reason, it just bugs me.
Okay.
It's a way to jump the queue.
Yeah,
right?
yeah, exactly.
It's a way to jump the queue. They say I have two fingers, I have something on this point, and they talk about something completely different. Yeah.
You've banned so many things at this point. What else is still annoying you?
You mean in terms of the trip? Which word?
Whoa, whatever. Yeah.
I would say whirlwind.
Oh no! Okay. Well, Victor, you described this as a theatrical trip. You said this is 3 acts of President Trump: Trump, the peacemaker; Trump, the rainmaker; Trump, the deal maker. Maybe he was the peacemaker with Cambodia and Thailand. Certainly seems like was a rainmaker as it relates to all of these economic deals that were signed. When it comes to deal maker, it seems like both of you are a bit more iffy about how much deal making really went down with China in particular. On that, you've said, this wasn't a big grand deal. It was maybe a shorter meeting than you might have expected. And ultimately, this escalatory cycle is continuing with China, and China's feeling more confident, Brian, you said, about generally their role and their standing. So then you've talked about the need to build US leverage in advance of these next meetings. Your Washington Post piece talks about one way of doing that, Victor. And then a couple of surprises in the nuclear realm, both in terms of the testing and saying actually China might benefit most from that, Brian. And then on with South Korea and the submarines, a form of nuclear latency as you described it, and clearly related to North Korea. And then looking ahead, bumps ahead. This was a tactical de-escalation, not a real ceasefire or a truce. We'll be looking ahead to that meeting in April, if that happens, if President Trump does go to China. But you have given us a lot to think about. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah, good to be here. Thanks.
Thanks, Brian. Thanks, Victor. Thanks for listening to State of Play. If you enjoyed this episode, subscribe to it wherever you heard it. And you can find more analysis at www.csis.org/geopolitics. Until next time.